Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. We've got you covered. Traditional league, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
What's going on? What's popping? What's happening, man? It is the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. Once again, doing it big here. Fantasy things, fantasy football. We're going to be talking about a lot of different things today. But first and foremost, please don't forget, follow our social media. That's where we get a lot of our interactions from. So, you know, like everybody else, we use Twitter, we use Facebook, we use Instagram. And we're pretty active on all three. So please, people, you got some questions for us? Hit us up, Twitter, GSMC_F football, F for fantasy, not F is for friends, or Wheezy F baby. Or unless it is, because Wheezy F baby and the F is for fantasy. So, first topic of the day as we get past the cheesy corniness. Michael Thomas has been in the news, under fire. People have come to finally set ablaze on Michael Thomas, and people are tired of him basically being confident in himself, I guess. I don't really know what other way to put it. He had a phenomenal numbers season last year, and from a fantasy perspective, he's going to be the first wide receiver taken off the board. Bar none, there's no other receiver that even really comes that close to him as far as the production value and the return. He'll probably never get to what he did. He probably won't do what he did last year. Again, it's very unlikely, but at the same time, you can't really doubt him, and you don't know what he can't do. But what you do know is people cannot guard Mike. And a guy, I'm going to shout out his Twitter. His @name is @MattHarmon_BYB, and he put out this reception perception over the last 2 years. So in 2018, he had an 82.2% success rate versus man coverage, and it's the top score in their metrics history. And he had an 82.2% success rate versus press. 2019. 78.6 success versus man and 80.4% versus the press. And the route charts kind of back this up even more so. So he, the thing right now is that, he only runs slant routes. Well, Michael Thomas' success on slants was 85%. He has 100% on screens, but he doesn't get the screen calls that much in Saints offense. 100% flat routes, comeback routes are 100%, curl routes are 94%, dig routes are 90%, posts are 84%, 9-yard outs are 55%, corners are 50%, and out routes are 85.7%. And that was in 2018. 2019 is kind of more of the same. And when we get down to it, all of the 4 success rates cleared the 94th percentile in reception perception history, and he was playing at the number 1 X receiver role, lining up in the slot on fewer than 28% of his sample snaps, while seeing double in press coverage at some of the higher rates in the NFL. So Michael Thomas definitely does still get double, but you can't guard him. So, for example, if you want to see the percentages of which he actually runs, he runs 30% slants are called for him, So that's the highest, of course, but it's not anything different than other players in the NFL at his position. Slant routes are pretty common. So he runs 30% slants, 14% curls, 14% digs, 3% post, 10% nines, 2% corner routes, 10% out routes, 5% in the flat, and 3% on comeback routes. And like I said earlier, he doesn't run screens very at all, and it's 2.8% on those. For comparison, Julio Jones runs 1% screens, 31% slant routes, 12% corner curl routes, 9% out routes, 3% corners, 15% nines, 7% post routes, comeback routes 4%, flat routes 5%. So when you look at people who like to say Michael Thomas is less than Julio Jones or DeAndre, but this is just a level bad take. Not to say that you may not think Julio is better. I think Julio is like neck and neck with Michael Thomas as far as efficiency and able to really do some stuff. But all these people who say all he does is run slants, he's one of the higher rates in the league, but other several number one wide receivers like Hopkins, AJ Green hover around 28% in their most recent seasons. So they're really picking and choosing, in my opinion, arguing this point about slant routes. And if slants is what he does, go guard him. That's the end all be all of it to me. Go guard his slant routes. Oh, wait, you forgot. He's one of the most elite route runners in the NFL. He doesn't have the breakneck speed. He doesn't have a lot of separation speed, but that's okay. He's using what he has to his advantage, and for some reason that's a problem. And when he's good, any athlete who's good enough to be the best in their position is going to have extreme confidence in said position. It's what comes with the territory. Any cornerback in the league is overtly confident in his ability to defend any wide receiver, shut him down, especially if they're top tier. You have to be. You can't back down from disrespect or fear or whatever the case may be from anybody at that position, because once the edge is gone, they can break you. You have to have that edge, and athletes have edges all the time to get past it. And then one of the Saints beat writers, or a famous beat writer now, does his own content, Nick Underhill. He was last year writing for the Patriots for 1 year, and then he has come back to the Saints to write on his own and do his own website. He recently was watching The Last Dance, like I'm sure most of us sports fans were actually watching, and he says that Michael Thomas, and this was before the Twitter thing happened, or the Instagram comment happened, is that Michael Thomas has this sort of Michael Jordan attitude where he's kind of otherworldly, trying to find things to kind of boost his playing ability, get him motivated. And the biggest competitor he's seen in the locker room, like there's no bigger competitor than Michael Thomas in the locker room for the Saints. So not even like a day or two later, this whole situation comes out with that Instagram question that Devontae Parker answered, and then Michael Thomas, because we all know what happened. And it's just an example. Like, I see it as this is just another thing that Michael Thomas is going to use, because people try to slight him all the time as far as what he's capable of and what he is good at, this and all. And honestly, I'm all for it as a Saints fan, of course. I don't care. I like the fact that Michael Thomas isn't afraid to speak his mind and on himself and is confident in himself. I'd rather have that than somebody who constantly gets disrespected and people say he's overrated. I mean, they'll do that anyway, so I'd rather see him be confident in himself and just do his thing, because at the end of the day, no one has been able to prove that they can stop what he does if it's so easy or if it's really simple. And no one really thinks about, oh wow, if it's that simple, why doesn't every wide receiver do it? Or why doesn't DeAndre Hopkins do it more if it seems easier? Because they don't have the same skill set. That's what it boils down to. They don't have the same skill set. People will make up any excuse in the world to hate on somebody because they're confident. And maybe it's because most people aren't generally confident in themselves. And thus, when somebody is cocky and confident, everybody wants somebody to be the humble athlete. We all want the humble athlete in the sport. Or because maybe he hasn't won a ring yet, he's not allowed to be cocky or allowed to braggadocious or anything like that. But he just won Offensive Player of the Year. Let him brag a bit. Let him be happy. And I guess it's because he sought after this that people are really tired of it. But at the end of the day, the stats back it up. Michael Thomas is one of the best wide receivers in the league. He doesn't just run slants. And on average, around a lot of people in general who are the best in the league run slants as well. Bottom line, that's it. His hands are sure thing. Sure, he doesn't run a lot of deep outs, doesn't run a lot of deep posts, but that's not the only thing that makes a good wide receiver a good wide receiver. And any of the top guys know this. Most of the top guys know this, and that's what it is. That's what it boils down to. We're going to take a break, and we're going to actually get into some actual legit fantasy topics, because this one was more of a rant than fantasy breakdown. But we'll be talking about the 2020 fantasy sleepers coming up.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Okay, so coming back in, we were just talking about how Michael Thomas is not overrated, and we had some interesting stats to back that up and bringing that all into how I really feel about Michael Thomas in general and just what I think people are missing the point of. Anyway, now we're getting into some actual fantasy conversation. That's good, right? We all like that. The simulation that figured out Derrick Henry's big season, the one that predicted that Alvin Kamara and Christian McCaffrey were going to be absolute studs at their position, Sportsline, they have done it again, and they simulated the 2020 season 10,000 times and identified must-draft fantasy football sleepers. So this isn't about the big names and all this, but this is about the sleepers. So understanding all the moves, so like Tom Brady and Phillip Rivers leaving their respective teams, and Melvin Gordon leaving the Chargers and going to the Broncos, Todd Gurley joining the Falcons, all those moves could affect productivity in identifying 2020 fantasy football sleepers who could define the season are surefire ways to succeed this year. And Sportsline was all over Henry from the start of 2019. He was going off the board around the 5th round, but Sportsline had him ranked as a top 20 back and graded him higher than multiple running backs who were picked in the 3rd round on average. And of course, the result, Henry finished as 2019 rushing champion and the number 2 fantasy running back. So fantasy players who followed this advice probably had a really, really great season. And like I said earlier, they were calling past sleepers like Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara, Devontae Adams. They are pretty good at what they do. So without further ado, here is some of their sleepers. So with Nick Foles coming in to push Mitchell Trubisky as quarterback, the overall target quality could improve for guys like Anthony Miller. So they're looking at Anthony Miller. They're all over him. The former 2nd round pick has a steady rookie season and was rewarded with a larger overall workload in 2019 and caught 52 passes for 656 yards. But saw his touchdown production drop off significantly, where he had 7 as a rookie, but only 2 in 2019. And the Bears offense really took a whole step back anyway. So let's keep this in mind. The Bears offense was pretty bad for a good portion of the season last year, which was a big turnoff for people who owned their players. So first things first, they had to address the quarterback situation the best way they could, and it's to frame it as some sort of quarterback competition, and that there's no competition there. It really, really is not a competition. It is a PR stunt to say we're going to give Mitchell Trubisky another chance, quote unquote, to try and win, quote unquote, the starting job, quote unquote. Maybe that's too many quote unquotes, but wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Nick Foles is going to be the starter week 1 for the Chicago Bears. And it really shouldn't, people may think that, the Trubisky people are going to be outraged or really disappointed with this decision. But if you look at it, they don't have a lot of time to waste here. They have, on average, a really, really good playoff defense, and at their best day, a championship level defense, with leading with Khalil Mack and all their great corners and safeties, and their linebacker play is ridiculous. The Bears defense is ridiculously studded out, and they had to make a choice on how they're going to fix their offense. So they have to start with the quarterback. So they bring on Nick Foles. So Anthony Miller might be getting some run, especially since Taylor Gabriel was released in the off season, and he's ranked ahead 11th round options like Emmanuel Sanders and Alshon Jeffrey, despite the fact that he's going in the 13th round on average. So another sleeper is wide receiver Michael Gallup, because he exploded on the scene last year and finished last season with 66 receptions for 1,000 yards, or 1,107 yards and 6 touchdowns. And in his final game of the year, he caught 5 of 7 targets for 98 yards, 3 touchdowns in Dallas for the 7-16 win over Washington. He built good rapport with Dak Prescott, so that's always a good thing. And he averaged about 8.1 targets per game in 2019. So Randall Cobb and Jason Witten, who combined for 166 targets last year, both left in free agency. So that will free up some things. And of course, you do have to worry about the fact that they did draft another wide receiver, but he's probably going to be running more of the number 2 stuff. And I think that in a deeper league, he will be somebody to definitely look at. So you'll be seeing things like Stephon Diggs, Julian Edelman, and Tyler Boyd, who this model predicts that Gallup will perform better than them, probably due to less noise. The Cowboys have a lot of offensive weapons, and that's something that can help make your job easier as a third option, I would assume. So I think those two, at least right now, are some of the bigger sleepers involved. So you can also think about it like this. They also extremely high on overlooked wide receiver going into the middle rounds of the 2020 fantasy football drafts. This receiver is ranked in the top 10 of his position and in line to outperform receivers taken earlier like Mike Evans, Adam Thielen, and these guys really can shine in moments that I think people are going to overlook. So get at them. Go to Sportline. I'm not sponsored by them or anything. I just think they make good content and they're worth checking out. So to add my own little twist in there, I'd like to see some topics on Courtland Sutton, because I think Courtland Sutton is a guy that arguably is going to have an interesting year, primarily because he is in a situation where two new receivers are brought into the mix. And when one of them is, of course, Alabama stud Jerry Jeudy, and they have KJ Hamler coming in, who is a speedster guy who can catch out wide, go down, do screen stuff. He's really quick on his feet. That can really open up an offense. And if Drew Lock really is the guy for Denver, he already has rapport with someone like Courtland Sutton. And I'd be I'm high on him as a person and as a player. So I think Courtland Sutton is somebody to be looking at for sure when it comes to wide receivers. And you just have to think about it from that perspective. We're going to be talking a little bit more about the Panthers as I segue into the DJ Moore conversation, because I think DJ Moore is a guy that, although may not be as high and you don't want to use a high pick, but I think DJ Moore might be falling in the draft just a tiny little bit, just a slight fall off from where he might end up projecting next year, like what his actual projections should come out to be, because I think he'll end up having a pretty solid season coming this fall, if football does happen, I should say. Caveats here. We don't know if sports will come back yet, but the NBA is looking like they are going to figure this thing out. So if the NBA can figure it out, that means the NFL definitely is going to figure it out, as the NFL does not want to lose any money at all, any way of revenue at all. So they're going to figure out a way to play no matter what the costs are. So with that said, they are probably going to find a way to get DJ Moore involved. They, as in the Panthers, they got a quarterback for the foreseeable future who is really good at quick reads and able to, if you can build a system on quick reads and doesn't have to think overly too much, already has a good running back to lean on, he will be fantastic. And that is the best thing that they could have had for someone like DJ Moore, who I believe when he came in his rookie season was not 100% utilized perfectly, but he's definitely showed strides of being a pretty serviceable wide receiver and could potentially have a breakout year set out for him in the receiving department, as a lot of attention is still going to be on guys like Christian McCaffrey in that backfield. But we're going to take a break here, and coming out of the break, we're going to come back and talk even more fantasy football stuff.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
So I've been thinking about the Pittsburgh Steelers a lot. They have been one of the more consistent teams in the NFL as far as offensive explosion, innovation. For the back half of the last 10 years especially, they have really tuned out one of the more consistent teams. They've always been in the playoffs, usually, except for last year. And Mike Tomlin has a way of getting that offense ready to go no matter what. And of course, it helps when you have a future Hall of Famer, all-time blue chipper in Ben Roethlisberger. He did not have Ben Roethlisberger for majority of the season last year, which was really hurtful for the Steelers' chances of making any sort of playoff push. And it's a miracle that they were able to finish 8-8, in my honest opinion. So coming to 2020 now, with that gruesome injury that happened to Roethlisberger, he's still kind of rehabbing his way back, but he's definitely throwing the football now, as we saw that video surface a few days ago about him getting together with Juju and with James Conner and such and throwing the football around. And he was looking all right. He shaved off his beard, which supposedly means that he's getting back on track of coming back. The team offensively is getting behind it, the whole he's back tweets and all this. It seems very encouraging that he will be back for this season. I don't know exactly when. I don't know if he will have to sit out just a little bit longer, but it does look like progress is being made and it looks like he'll recover in a nice way. But at the same time, he's not a spring chicken, right? He's not somebody who's very youthful, and he, Father Time is, he's coming along. So we don't know when the egg will hatch, so to speak, on this era, or this end of an era really, of these older quarterbacks. So, Drew Brees is on the tail end. Tom Brady's on his last ride, essentially. Phillip Rivers, last ride. They're all over the league. Everybody's on their last ride. Ben Roethlisberger, even though we thought his last ride was 2 years ago even, and he decided to come back and keep playing. So everybody's kind of extending their window of trying to get that last championship, trying to make that last push. They don't want to stop playing. These guys don't get hit as much as you would think they would anyway, especially if the team that they're playing for is smart. They'd build an offensive line that would help them not get, tagged up all the time, not get banged up. So, it was an interesting time for older quarterbacks like Roethlisberger. Breeze was out for a little while and such. And guys like Phillip Rivers really had a weird year of decline that people did not really predict, honestly, as he looked really good the season prior. And Tom Brady also slowed down a bit. Granted, we don't know if that's due to the help and the offensive weapons that were surrounding him at the time when he was in New England last year, but be that as it may, the decline still was there. So I bring this all up to bring this back to the Steelers' main point is how much do we trust the Steelers' offensive weapons, and how much of that is reliant on Ben Roethlisberger being healthy enough to execute. So I feel like Juju is a guy who really suffered last year to no Big Ben, as Duck Hodges and, of course, Mason Rudolph are really no true replacement for Ben Roethlisberger. And it really hurt him, not only because he was hurt, but there weren't a lot of chemistry with those guys to really grow and figure it out. Also, he's working his way into being the number one wide receiver option on that team when he was previously second or even third in some degree, if you really think about it, and how he's been brought up in that system after Antonio Brown left. So it was not a good first look to see what Juju is as a number one option on that team. But we do know that the Steelers, no matter what, predicate everything on establishing the run, because that opens up the play action game. And that's when we see a lot of big bombs and a lot of chance plays and deep throws down the field, of course, come from the run game. James Conner really, really held strong the year prior to last year when Le'Veon was not there. And when last year occurred, for the most part, for one, he got hurt. He was not healthy for parts of the season. And then coming back, it was just really, really a struggle for that offense to make anything really click and start going. But hopefully he'll be back ready to go healthy to improve upon what 2 years ago looked like he was going to be one of the better fantasy running backs in the league. So you put those two together, and then you have, tight end position where people really thought that the Steelers had a sleeper there for a little while, but it never really came out to anything ever in Vance McDonald. So everything revolves around if their quarterback can get right and do what he does best. And the thing about it is, do we know Big Ben can do what he does best because he's healthy, or do we know if he's going to have to change? So what I mean by is from personal experience of watching Drew Brees. Drew Brees, well, one, he never was this super, super talented arm. He didn't have the arm talent. And that never stopped him from being one of the most accurate, if not the most accurate quarterback of all time. He found other strengths, and it wasn't like his deep ball was very weak. It just wasn't one of his strong points. Regardless, over the years, of course, his deep ball has definitely been in decline, and the power underneath his passes are just not what they used to be. His fastball is significantly slower than what it used to be. And it happens to everybody. Everybody goes through it at some point in their long career, especially if you've been playing as long as Drew Brees. And the game had to change for him to continue to play at a high level. So the Saints made sure, one, we were able to run the ball in order to alleviate a lot of pressure from him to just throw the ball 50 times a game like he had to in his prime, because the defense was not up to par, and thus he always had to try and keep the offense in the game all the time. Two, they had to make sure that he's not throwing deep post or fly routes or anything like that without having to really make a hard read on it. So they basically kept things within the 10 to 20 yard catch range for a lot of things. And then, of course, having someone like Michael Thomas, who is sure hands as everybody in the league, definitely helps. But I'm wondering, Big Ben, of course, has had one of the strongest arms we've seen in the NFL ever. But I'm sure his arm will also decline at some point. And when the arm starts declining, the accuracy also goes with the deep passes, and then you'll start getting some noodles out there that you don't really want to see really rearing their ugly heads out there. And that's something that everybody would want to avoid from their starting quarterback. So it seems like there could be a formula in place where running the ball is more predicated on, and getting Juju to run more routes in deep goes and really getting out in space, and using him all over the field, and maybe getting Vance McDonald out there and running different routes that are safer, not as deep. That can really, really help Ben Roethlisberger really acclimate to a culture change and may extend his career. But then again, Ben Roethlisberger has always played one way, and maybe that's just for the best of how the Steelers need to be able to play and how they play anyway. But with a defense as capable and as talented as they have, I don't think it would be in their worst interest to think more of dialing in, leaning on the defense in the run game. And, Big Ben can turn it on when he can, but he doesn't have to have it on all the time. And honestly, he probably won't have it on all the time anyway, because this is just how the story goes. You can turn it on in spurts, but you're not going to be on for the entirety of a 4-week span, right? It just gets less and less as time goes on, and you won't be able to lean on him for everything. So other people have to, step up. But let's take another break, and we'll get into some more fantasy football.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
So, Devonta Freeman is in the news today because he has been on different teams' radar. As you know, the once very, very fantasy friendly Atlanta Falcons running back was cut and let go. Yes, I know fantasy owners spam F, drop F in the chat or whatever the case you need to do, but he was let go, and he did not have a good season at all last year. It was his worst season as a starter, and now he's on the free agency waiver wire. So, of course, we know guys like Cam Newton and Jadeveon Clowney are considered some of the best available free agents left at this point in the offseason. But he is still somebody who may still have something left in the tank, as he's still relatively young, and he might have been overpaid in his time in Atlanta, but Atlanta had also other weird struggles going on, so maybe it wasn't just all him. Maybe he's being a fall guy right now. I don't know. Regardless, the Seattle Seahawks were interested in Freeman. They offered him a 1-year deal that would be worth a total of, or up to, $4 million, but the base salary was less than $3 million, and the deal in total would have been up to $4 million, and Freeman turned it down. While the Seahawks did offer the 1-year deal, they have about, I believe, $16 million in cap room this year to mess around with. So they had a lot of injuries last year, of course, in 2019. They had to bring back Marshawn Lynch out of retirement for their postseason run. Chris Carson is expected to be back at the start of the season, but Rashad Penny will likely have to start on the PUP list. So Seattle also has Travis Homer, the 4th round pick, DJ Dallas out of Miami. So they still need to be able to pay. Well, I say they should be, because I still think that Seattle is still going to bring back Jadeveon Clowney, but they still need to make sure they can pay him. So they're not trying to spend all their money on these running backs, especially if one of them is probably going to be put on the scout team or not really be in the reserves any longer, because they still have an injury with Rashad Penny. He knows the system longer, and it's going to be more of a whoever is best available is going to be in this backfield. So they also can look at guys like Carlos Hyde, who has been receiving some interest from other teams as well. The Eagles have shown interest in Freeman, but they already have a number one option in Miles Sanders. And if he's looking for a decent contract for his base salary, Philadelphia is probably the best place, as they have the 4th most cap space in the league currently for this off season. So this is probably the landing place if he's going to find one around the NFL. For running back bump, he's going to probably not get as much, and he won't be the guy there. But I don't think he's looking to be the guy. He's looking for a good base salary, make his money, play his time, and do what he does best. And maybe the Eagles can unlock that potential he had with the Falcons some years ago that has been kind of bottled up over time. He also had some interest from the Jets, but that's kind of a weird place, as the Jets have plenty of running back talent around. They have Le'Veon Bell, of course, is the clear number one. They signed Frank Gore, who is still treads on the tires as long as he's been playing. And they also drafted Florida running back LaMichael Pirine in the 4th round of the 2020 draft. So Freeman, he only averaged 3.6 yards per carry and had 46.9 yards per game across 14 of his total appearances. In 2015-2016, he appeared to be one of the best backs in the NFL, picking up Pro Bowl honors in both seasons while rushing for 2,150 or 135 yards total and scored 27 total touchdowns. So now he's 28. He may be edging out of his prime running back wise, but he's certainly still, usable. So he might be able to help somebody's team out for sure. So let's move on to the next slate of news, because this is the news segment. So if you know anything about the Cowboys, or if you're a fan of the NFC East and what they go through year in and year out and being in the news cycle and all that, you should know that although a lot of people around the National Football League who are not Cowboys fans basically despise the Cowboys in national media because they get so much talk, but they haven't been playoff relevant or really that good as far as record is concerned in quite some time, since 2014. So it's been some time since they've actually been relevant playoff wise and getting there. But for one thing they have been good at is player development, and on the defensive side of the ball, their player development has been well documented, as they have had a stud front seven for the past few years. So the offseason has been very nice to the Cowboys, all things considered. And another nice thing has come in right near the tail end of May. So Aldon Smith, who was once a really great pass rusher, who still might be, has signed a 1-year deal ahead of the 2020 draft. And the Cowboys got their wish. So according to CBS News, Roger Goodell has in fact reinstated Aldon Smith to the league on a conditional basis, adding another level of potency to the Cowboys' pass rush. So we don't know if they'll give Aldon Smith his compatriot Randy Gregory the green light as well, but it's expected that this will come to pass soon, and the Cowboys will have 2 high-ceiling edge rushers that will be equipped with small cost and risk. So Aldon Smith's deal is 1 year, and it's staggered financially in a way that motivates him to continue walking the right path, rewarding him with added payouts for showing up to training camp as well as preseason games. And he would have to be viable enough to make the team's final roster in order to land a fully guaranteed payout of $2 million. As it stands, Smith has done everything required of him to return to the NFL, and his story is one that involves him admittedly having succumbed to his struggle with alcoholism to the point that he was once sleeping under a car in his own garage. So he is reunited, in a sense, with a lot of great things going on in the Cowboys organization. You know, they've just brought in some great coaches that are infamous in the league for offense, but defensively they've already been pretty stout. I think the Cowboys defense has been the best part, and that's not a knock on their offensive potential. It's just their defense has been really, really stellar. So the Cowboys defense can help Mike McCarthy's inaugural season really, really impactful, and he'll be joined DeMarcus Lawrence and Dontari Poe, Gerald McCoy, and then Tyron Crawford will be returning, and they have promising draft picks in Neville Gallimore and Bradley Anae, among others. So their team is shaping up to be really, really, really strong next year, and I really have a good feeling about the Cowboys' playoff potential this coming season. And I know NFC East fans are not going to want to hear this, but the Cowboys have a very, very strong potential of being one of the better teams in the NFC, period. And if they can finally put it together, they may have a roster that's good enough to make a run at the big dance, at the Super Bowl. So, yeah, man, the Cowboys are really starting to figure some things out. Wow, I never thought I'd say something like that. I just had to take a deep breath because I was really starting to think about, wow, the NFL is really starting to have a lot of parity. There's not a lot of horrible teams, not a lot of horrible teams really left. Everything is kind of about situation and circumstance and where teams are at in their current standing. So the Cowboys are finally looking like they're going to be a really real contender, real big boy in the playoff seedings in the NFC. So congratulations, America's team, quote unquote. You guys are finally going to be looking like you're capable of doing stuff other than being in the national news cycle all the time. All right. We're going to take another break, and coming out, we're going to be talking about some 2020 projections for the Panthers, and that's coming up.
Are you looking to get your college football fixed? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
So the NFC South has basically had a facelift of itself for a little while in this offseason. And a lot of different teams in that division has seen some significant offensive changes. The Panthers are no different. They went and scored a new quarterback as they let go of Cam Newton. They decided to cut him because they couldn't find a new home for him somewhere else via trade. Of course, they brought in Matt Rule, former offensive coordinator for the LSU football Tigers. Go Tigers. As now, their offense potential is going to change a bit. As we can see, they don't have Kyle Allen anymore as well. They traded him to the Redskins with his former head coach. So what is their offensive potential now? Because as much as that quarterback change is very much a real thing, they did most of their off-season stuff on defense as they're trying to revamp and retool their defense the best way they can. In fact, they spent all of their draft picks in 2020 on defense, which is the first time they've done that in their franchise history. And not many teams typically go all in on one side of the football, but the Panthers did that. So where are all the projections for some of these offensive talents? We should probably start with the cream of the crop, the creme de la creme, Christian McCaffrey. So ESPN is projecting Christian McCaffrey will get around 230 carries, totaling 1,000 rushing yards almost, almost over 1,000 rushing yards, and 9 rushing touchdowns, plus 89 catches for 734 yards and 3 receiving touchdowns, and that would give him 333.42 points in fantasy, and that'd be second amongst all players behind Lamar Jackson's projection, which is 338. So what that means is Christian McCaffrey is still looked at to be the guy who will be the most talented fantasy offensive weapon around. And I think that he is going to be the first offensive guy off the board, the first player off the board in many drafts. And the only person that might trump that is if somebody really thinks Saquon is going to have a stellar year and really, really come into his own as a standout back in this league. But unlike Saquon is in a position where there's not a lot of offensive talent left around him, and there is some offensive talent around Christian McCaffrey, so that can make his load less harder. It will be less harder for him to get it. So, for example, DJ Moore, who I'm really, really high on. DJ Moore is projected to have pretty much a match of what he got in 2019 for 2020, and with 87 catches, 1,119 receiving yards, and 4 touchdowns, that's about 228 fantasy points, and that would rank him on the list as the 42nd most projected fantasy points in the league. So I think that's a little low, and I would be thinking that he's going to be better than this, especially on touchdowns, because I think that people are going to really, really hone in on Christian McCaffrey's touchdown potential this year, and I don't think he'll get as much as the people might think. So, of course, we have to talk about their newly acquired quarterback, Teddy Bridgewater. So Bridgewater is projected to have 300 attempts, or 300 completions out of 406 attempts. I don't really know how you get to that point. And totaling from 3,347 yards, 16 TDs, and 9 picks, and throwing in a rushing score, and he will have about 191 fantasy points, which would put him at just below 90 overall in the ESPN list. We move on to Robbie Anderson, who will catch projectedly around 57 balls and be under 1,000 yards and have 5 TDs, and that would put him at number 108. Robbie Anderson, I'm not too sure I know what his role will be, but I'm really not too sure what his number projections might be. As coming from New York, he was sort of the guy who looked to be the number 1, but of course we know that there are circumstances that just didn't happen last season as well. And we know that Curtis Samuel is a guy who comes in and will probably have similar numbers to what we just spoke about. So he's projected to get 54 catches, 663 yards, and 5 TDs, which isn't too bad. And if you're in a pinch that needs a quality guy who can come out there, make some catches, and maybe even go off a bit, because Curtis Samuel had a pretty solid season last year for where he was in his position. That's something to really look at. And then Joey Sly was a kicker that a lot of people were really looking at, especially beginning of the year. And they have him connecting 26 of 31 field goal attempts and 31 of 33 extra points. Graham Gano might have something to say about it, but it would give him a 117 points on the scale. So that's a pretty solid amount of points. And then tight end Ian Thomas. So, of course, Ian Thomas is going to be replacing Greg Olsen. And Greg Olsen is no longer there anymore. So it's the end of a fantasy era of the Greg Olsen, Cam Newton duo that was so near and dear to many fantasy football players' hearts across the nation. But he's projected to have around 43 catches, 424 yards, and about 2 touchdowns. So probably not the tight end that you're going to be looking for as far as what you want on your fantasy team. Now, of course, we know who is the best guy to get on your fantasy team from that list. And if you're blessed enough, if you're in a snake draft to get Christian McCaffrey with first overall, you do it twice over. You do it so much that it becomes second nature. You dream about it. You click the button and you have a league winner in your hands, and the draft just becomes a lot easier to handle later on. So, who's next? And of course, I should probably just get DJ Moore out the way. I think he is going to have a really nice season that a lot of people are kind of sleeping on him. And I see him really coming into his own. He may not get the touchdowns that I think he should get, primarily because there is a lot of different wide receiver guys that are projected to get, a good quality amount of touchdowns in their own right. So the ball does have to be shared to some degree. And like I was saying earlier, Christian McCaffrey's biggest quality is that he demands a lot of attention. And when someone demands a lot of attention, of course, people end up getting freer. People end up having less attention on themselves. So you get stuff like the AJ Green effect. So Tyler Boyd was really, really getting active out there when AJ Green was out there alongside him. And also you get the effects of people having multiple wide receiver talents and all this. So like Julio gets so many people opportunities because he's so good. People have to double Julio Jones. Same thing with Odell. Same thing with anybody who is of any quality wide receiver, tight end product. They just draw doubles and you have to, or else you are not going to have a good time. Basically, you're basically conceding defeat if you don't. So you can't concede defeat against Christian McCaffrey. He will literally just torch you all game from both aspects of the offensive game. So you got to let somebody else beat you. And I think it will be a mistake for defenses to let DJ Moore beat you because he has a lot of talent, but he may be the lesser of two evils, and being the number 2 on that offense and essentially being the number 1 wide receiver on that offense is going to be really, really beneficial. And I really do believe that he is somebody that you guys should look at as far as the fantasy football sleeper that isn't really a sleeper, but he may have a chance to really cement himself as one of the better wide receivers in the league. All right, we're going to take our final break, and then we're going to come back. We're going to be talking about dynasties, and I'm not talking about dynasty leagues.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
The word dynasty has a lot of different meanings among pop culture, sports world, all different types of stuff. For example, dynasty in music could mean a lot of different things. So for Michael Jackson, his legacy the Jackson 5, his solo career, the idea of his music catalog, it might be considered a dynasty. The Beatles might be considered a dynasty. Run DMC might be considered a dynasty even. And nobody would really question that as, merit and talent, accolades, all this. Impact matters. And I feel like impact is something that a lot of people say really, really signifies a dynasty alongside with winning, of course. And let's say another example. So Dragon Ball Z or Dragon Ball, the intellectual property, the IP by Toriyama is considered a dynasty franchise as it has one of the most impactful characters known ever created in anime history, and it was brought to the West, and the West essentially adopted him as their own and has made it one of the most popular anime of all time, if not the most popular. And it just keeps on getting more games, more sponsorships, more merchandise made. It's forever popular. Same thing with One Piece in the East. One Piece is like almost a religion in the East. Dynasty. So let's take this back to sports, right? So in fantasy football, of course, you have dynasty leagues, which are where you have people keeping. But honestly, the goal in dynasty leagues is to create a dynasty. Create a team, a franchise of your own that is just leagues above, better than everybody else's. You know how to do all the right moves. You know how to win. And winning is very important. You have to win in order to be considered a dynasty. And if you win, let's say 4 out of 3 or 3 out of 4 years, you're a dynasty. That is a good run. In basketball, dynasties are typically, you have to be there for 3 years, 4 years, and you have to win really at minimum 2 before you can even get qualified as a dynasty. And not in basketball, really, the idea of winning 3, like the 3-peat, is just something that people really, really gravitate towards. So like the Lakers years where they 3-peated, and of course the Bulls 2 3-peats that of course everybody's talking about now, about dynasties, as The Last Dance is something that a lot of people tuned into, as myself included. And this article written by Adam Sheldon, or Sheathen, he starts talking about The Last Dance as well, and how it's perceived in professional sports about Michael Jordan. And you have to think about the NFL's version of this, of course, not as in The Last Dance, but as in what is a dynasty. They've had a few dynasties over the years, so let's think about this, right? The Steelers back in the day, they've had Green Bay dynasties. They've had, of course, the Cowboys dynasty in the 90s. And the Patriots dynasty that has lasted over the last 10 plus years. Who can replace a dynasty like that? Well, it's time to figure it out, because Brady's relocation to Tampa Bay has set ablaze to the dynasty path of the Patriots. There's no longer the dynasty, at least right now. The run is over. It was ended by, the biggest running back ever seen on the planet and his unstoppable torching self in Derrick Henry. I know that was quite a description for Derrick Henry, but I enjoy running back, so take it as it is. But let's get into who potentially could be the next dynasty up. So the Kansas City Chiefs, of course, have to be on the very tip top of the list because they have a transcendent quarterback talent, and that's something that you need in order to be considered a dynasty. You need transcendent quarterbacks. When you look at the 49ers dynasty, they had a transcendent quarterback in Joe Montana. When you look at the Cowboys, of course, they've had players all over the place, Michael Irvin. And of course, they had the Troy Aikmans of the world. They've had so many different types of players. that were involved in those sort of dynasties, and it was really, really big time that Mahomes is a part of the Chiefs, because if the Chiefs don't have Mahomes, you don't really know how far where the bar is set. There is no bar for how high Mahomes and the Chiefs can go, especially when they have guys like Travis Kelce. Sammy Watkins is seen as an afterthought when he was touted as a first-round talent, and still has first-round talent ability as well. So take that as you will. They get Clyde Edwards. They are looking to be poised to make another run at the Super Bowl this upcoming season, and it doesn't look like the train is going to stop anytime soon. And Andy Reid has set himself up to basically win multiple Super Bowls and really make a run at this thing and turn it into a dynasty. Baltimore, for example, is another one that could potentially be a really, really good dynasty. And of course, they need to win, and they have to make it out of the first round. And Lamar Jackson is a special talent. And it would be all the meaningful that would be such a story, right? If Lamar, with all the criticism that he gets and that he got before the draft, after his rookie season, even after his second year, if he can find a way to come out here with a championship in the next year or two and then really start to pile it on, he's going to be an all-time great guy. He's going to be what people see who saw Michael Vick as, but with a ring. Because the thing about Michael Vick is he didn't win, and maybe his best years were not really behind him because of the going to jail for, animal abuse and all that stuff, but more so when he ended up going to the Eagles, he actually played quarterback for once in his life. And that's not something that he could have said for a lot of his career at the Falcons, because in the Falcons, he was really just running around throwing the ball. But he really wasn't playing quarterback. He wasn't out there just slinging it. And he had arm talent. He had one of the best arm talents we've seen in National Football League. But Lamar has a chance of doing similar things, but also winning, because the team around him is so much better than what Vic had. And it's not even close. He has all the tools capable of and available to him to make this thing a possibility. They have other teams on this list, like San Francisco. Dallas is the most interesting one to me, because I believe that Dallas is really built up to be potentially a really good team for a while. They have a lot of people on good contracts. Of course, the Dak Prescott contract thing might rub this in a weird direction. So Dak wants a cheaper, or doesn't want a cheaper contract. He wants a contract with less years, so that way he can get even more money later on down the road when the TV deal kicks in and the new money comes in. But they do have quite a lot of talent. Mike McCarthy, of course, an offensive guru. They get CeeDee Lamb in the first round. Of course, they already have Amari Cooper, and they have an offensive line that should be really good, even though they had Travis Frederick retirement. But, Tyron Smith, Zach Martin, Lael Collins is going to hold it down for quite some time. And, of course, they have one of the best running backs in football on their team. What more could you really ask for? Their defense is stellar, even though they lost Byron Jones. But their pass rush is significantly improved over this offseason. And it looks like it's going to be one of the strongest it has been in the league, just like last year and the year prior, to be honest, if we're being real with ourselves. But yeah, man, dynasties are cool to think about. Maybe we'll see one soon to come. They never come until it's over, really, until we think about it. All right, so that's the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast for today. Thank you all for listening and checking me out, listening to us. Don't forget to follow our social media. So that's our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Hit us up on Twitter at GSMC_F football. Ask us some questions. Come chat with us. Come hang out, man. But without a doubt, we'll see you all next week. Thank you. Thank you for listening. And don't forget to rate and review us. Peace out.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.